You are live.
Okay, good evening. We'll call the Community Services Advisory Commission meeting to order. The first order of business is to the swearing in of our new members. So Vice Mayor DeRosa, if you would please do the honors.
Thanks so much, Tom. And let me begin by just saying thank you to everybody. I know it's a lot of work to serve on these commissions. I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for a while, and it is a lot. And it's so, so appreciated. And I know it's a little bit of an extra challenge on Zoom, but you're all looking great and it's going to be wonderful. I also particularly want to say thank you for the topic that you're going to tackle tonight, stormwater management. I was thinking about that. I mean, that's one of the topics we discuss a lot, and so appreciate your insights and work on this. So with that, we have three wonderful new members of the commission tonight, and I thought I will start with Dee. You ready? All right, so if you want to unmute, so then if you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me.
Okay.
I state your full name.
I, Alice D. Kanonchoff,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties as a member of
the duties as a member of
the Community Service Advisory Commission
the Community Service Advisory Commission
of the City of Dublin,
of the City of Dublin,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the State of Ohio,
and the State of Ohio,
and the ordinances and charters of the City of Dublin.
and the ordinances and charters of the City of Dublin.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
you. No turning back now. Okay, Gary, you ready?
I am ready.
All right, raise that right hand. I state your full name.
I, Gary Gasson,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties as a member of
the duties as a member of
the Community Service Advisory Commission
the Community Services Advisory Commission
of the City of Dublin,
of the City of Dublin,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the State of Ohio,
and the State of Ohio,
and the ordinance and charter
and the ordinance and charter
of the City of Dublin, Ohio.
of the City of Dublin, Ohio.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Very good. All right, Jim, so you should know it by heart. Should you just want to rattle it off or what? You ready? Can you unmute? I'm not hearing. There you go.
I've been making some notes in case I forget. So
Well, I've got to tell you, sometimes when I've done this, they read the whole thing and I'm like, oh, no. So we'll go slow and sweet. How's that?
Thank
You ready?
you.
Here we go.
yeah,
Raise your right hand. Here we go. I state your full name.
I, James M. Snyder,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties as a member of
the duties as a member of
the Community Services Advisory Commission
the Community Services Advisory Commission
of the City of Dublin,
of the City of Dublin,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Ohio,
and the state of Ohio,
and the ordinances and charter of the city of Dublin,
and the ordinances and charter of the city of Dublin,
Ohio.
Ohio.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Wonderful. So, yay. Wonderful to this great group. You do tremendous work. And on behalf of all of council, thank you all so very much. I guess back to you, Tom.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor. We appreciate you taking the time to swear in the new members. It's better to be sworn in than sworn at. So welcome, everyone. You'll find that this is a very interesting group, a very congenial group, and we are respectful of one another, and we appreciate input from everybody. So that's welcome. I'm glad to have you on the commission. So without further ado, we will keep the meeting moving right along, and we will move on to election of chair and vice chair. I think we need to unmute.
Well, if you're looking for nominations, I would like to self-nominate myself for chairperson.
Okay. We have a nomination of Steve Dirtz for chair. Any other nominations? The railroad is is chugging along, Steve, so. Okay, hearing no other nominations, we will call the vote for chair of the Community Services Advisory Commission. Chair Steve Dirtz. Dritz, sorry, Steve.
It's okay.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Congratulations, you are it. You get to do the vice chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. And thank you for your years of service as our chairperson. Really appreciate it. Do we have any nominees? Anybody like to nominate themselves or someone else to be the vice chair of our commission?
This is Elizabeth. I'd like to nominate Vivek.
Well, thank you. I was thinking about you, but it's fine. Thank you.
Any others?
Nope.
Okay. Shall we take a vote? All in favor of Vivek being our new vice chair, please say what, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, congratulations, Vivek.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item on the agenda is public comments. I'm not quite sure with this technology how we would see public comments. I should ask Cindy that, but okay, Nick, you know how we would see them?
Yeah, the public has the ability to submit any public comment in advance of the meeting. This is publicly advertised. Nobody has at this time. So we do not have any public comments for items not on the agenda.
Okay. Then we'll go to the approval of our meeting minutes from March 10th. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
A motion to approve.
A second?
I second.
Okay, we got Vivek as a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, our meeting minutes are approved. So now we have our stormwater management update. I'll turn over to you, Nick.
All right, thank you, Steve. Congrats to Steve, first of all, on being named the chair, and congrats to Vivek on being our vice chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As you quickly learned, you got to be quick on the draw or you have to be the vice chair.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so our main topic tonight will be the continuation of the stormwater management. This is a topic that many of you will be familiar with because it's one that you've been working on over the last, probably 6 months now. for a couple of new members, Dee, I know you're not quite as fresh as the other two, but I know you came in sort of at the back end of the topic initially. So we do have a couple members of our engineering team here tonight, and they're gonna just give a quick overview of the topic again, just to bring everyone back up to speed. That way, you know, a couple of our new members, you can get caught up a little bit and get a sense for what the discussion was like previously for our commission members. So we'll go through that process. Then that'll be from Michael Hendershot. Todd Garwick, another member of our engineering team, is going to go over in depth a little bit more on the topic. And then what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the recommendation that CSAC initially made to City Council. We'll have a discussion about council, the presentation that was made to City Council, their discussion about this topic specifically. I hope, you know, I did my best to get all of that information out to you all in advance. Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to watch through that, because it was a pretty robust discussion with City Council. So what we will take some time doing is having a discussion about, is the commission still comfortable with what the recommendation was initially after hearing City Council's feedback? If so, we will continue the discussion and advance this topic, and hopefully come out of tonight with some next steps or sort of a path forward for where we want to take this, or where the commission would like to take this topic. And so we'll discuss that a little bit more in depth when we get there. But for the time being, we're going to have Michael Hendershot sort of lead us off. I will be sharing the presentation here in a moment, so you should be able to see that on your screen and follow along as he provides that presentation. When he finishes his, as discussed before this meeting, Steve, as the chair, what we'll ask of you is just sort of to go down the row of our commission members and give each person the opportunity to ask any questions. If you don't have a question and it's your opportunity to speak, please just say, I have no questions at this time, and Steve can move on to the next member. After that, we will have Todd give his portion of the presentation. We'll go through the same process, and then we'll be able, I'll unshare the presentation. You should all be able to sort of see each other's faces, and you can have a little more robust of a discussion from that point forward on this topic. Does anyone have any questions before we get into the presentation? Okay, Michael, I'll go ahead and bring up the presentation and you can unmute.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Good evening, commission members. We would like to take the opportunity to present the information we shared at our September 2019 meeting, bring the new commission members up to speed on the topic, as well as to serve as a refresher for the rest of the commission. I'll be providing a stormwater system overview, as well as describing the City of Dublin stormwater management goals, which will highlight the importance of stormwater basins. I will also be discussing the development process for residential stormwater basins and a general stormwater basin overview to describe how the basins operate. Todd will be providing an inventory of stormwater basins, basin maintenance practices and associated costs, and maintenance benchmarking information of surrounding communities. Paul will conclude with recapping the option the commission recommended to City Council regarding the maintenance of stormwater basins for residential developments, as well as provide a recap of the February City Council meeting that discussed this topic. This graphic is a good representation of what happens when it rains in a developed environment. As shown, rain can occur over impervious surfaces such as rooftops, driveways, sidewalks, streets, and parking lots. Rain can also occur over pervious surfaces such as yards and green space. This rain is considered runoff if it doesn't soak into the ground and instead drains to the stormwater conveyance system. This conveyance system consists of catch basins, curb and gutter inlets, manholes, storm sewer, ditches, and swales. This runoff ultimately drains to rivers and streams. As the runoff flows over the surfaces, it accumulates debris, chemicals, sediments, or other pollutants that could adversely affect water quality if the runoff is left untreated. So what can be done to help mitigate any adverse effects of runoff in a built environment? The City of Dublin has the following stormwater management goals. To manage stormwater runoff by regulating the release rate, which is also called water quantity management. Another goal is to reduce the discharge of pollutants, which is also called water quality management. There are multiple measures that can be utilized to provide water quantity and water quality management. These include retention basins, detention basins, permeable pavers, bioretention, and underground storage, to name a few. Water quantity management also reduces the likelihood of downstream flooding, stream bank erosion, habitat destruction, and infrastructure damage. Water quality management will help protect the environment by reducing pollution and preserving green space. Other stormwater management goals include the control of sedimentation and erosion, as well as maintaining compliance with state and federal regulations for stormwater management. In order to achieve those goals, the City of Dublin has a comprehensive stormwater management program. These 6 main components of the program include the master plan, maintenance of the stormwater system, capital improvement projects, the NPDES permit compliance, Chapter 53 stormwater regulations, and Chapter 151 floodplain control. Stormwater basins mainly fall under the category of the 4 highlighted components of the program. Todd will be discussing the maintenance component later in this presentation. I will be discussing the other 3 highlighted components of the program in more detail. The master plan is a document that was originally completed in 1999 and updated in 2009. The purpose of the master plan is to minimize impacts from development by establishing limits on stormwater discharges through modeling of city watersheds. The master plan contains prescribed release rates per acre for all city watersheds that a developed site is not permitted by code to exceed. The sizing and design of stormwater basins is largely based on the prescribed release rates that are defined in the master plan. The development and use of the prescribed release rates helps mitigate flooding problems and improves the overall appearance and environmental quality of streams. The master plan also effectively developed a drainage system map and database, as well as identified capital improvement projects associated with stormwater management. Another component of the stormwater management program is Chapter 53 of the City of Dublin Code of Ordinances, Stormwater Management and Stream Protection. This code was created in 1998 and later revised in 2005. Chapter 53 regulates stormwater from areas of new development for the purpose of protecting the public health. Chapter 53 is the legal backing to enforce the master plan and also establish the City of Dublin's Stormwater Management Design Manual. The design manual is a document that sets forth the city's standards for stormwater management and provides guidance for engineers in developing plans and stormwater calculations. The design manual includes control for water quantity, water quality, and erosion and sediment on construction sites. The design manual also provides design guidelines for control measures such as retention and detention basins. The design manual was adopted in 2005 and subsequently updated in 2013 and 2019. Another component of the City of Dublin Stormwater Management Program is compliance with the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Permit, or NPDES permit. This permit is regulated through the Environmental Protection Agency and was created in 1972 by the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act establishes the basic structure for regulating discharges and pollutants into the water of the United States and regulating standards for surface waters. There are 6 minimum control measures that are part of this permit, which are public education and outreach, public participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination, management of construction site runoff, management of post-construction site runoff, and good housekeeping and municipal operations. Retention and detention basins are part of minimum control measures 1, 4, 5, and 6. The city provides education to the public regarding the use and importance of stormwater basins. The management of construction and post-construction site runoff can be obtained by the use of stormwater basins. The maintenance of stormwater basins falls under the category of good housekeeping and municipal operations. As part of this permit, an annual report is required to be submitted every year to the Ohio EPA that summarizes the city's activities for compliance with the permit. The city makes it a practice to go above and beyond the required 6 minimum controlled measures and has been a leader in stormwater management for over 20 years. For example, the city adopted water quality regulations prior to the statewide mandate of water quality regulations by the EPA. Now that I've discussed the stormwater system, I'd like to step through an example to discuss the development process of residential stormwater basins. The aerial you see on the screen is the pre-developed condition for Celtic Crossing, which is the residential development located on the west side of Highland Quarry Road, north of Brand Road. For reference, the Dublin Jerome High School parking lot is at the bottom right of the slide. The development process starts with required prerequisite planning approvals. The first such approval is the preliminary development plan for the site, which includes preliminary drawings and stormwater calculations. At this stage in the project, details aren't finalized, but the general size, location, and type of stormwater management facility is identified. In the Celtic Crossing example, 4 retention basins were selected to manage the site's stormwater. Once the preliminary development plan has been approved, a final development plan and stormwater calculations are generated. The final development plan is equivalent to a 90% level final construction document submittal. Once the prerequisite planning approvals have been obtained, the final construction documents, which consist of construction drawings and a stormwater management report, are submitted to engineering for approval. The project is constructed once engineering approval of the construction documents has been obtained. After construction of the project, an as-built survey is required to be submitted to demonstrate compliance with the approved plans. Once the as-builts are approved by engineering, the City of Dublin conditionally accepts the public improvements. The public improvements are the streets, sidewalks, path, and public utilities for the development. There is a 1-year warranty period after conditional acceptance in which the developer is responsible for repairs of the public improvements if deemed necessary by the city. Once the 1-year warranty period expires, the City of Dublin maintains the public improvements. This slide shows a grading plan for the Celtic Crossing development. Please note this only shows the western half of the site. This slide shows an aerial of Celtic Crossing in a post-developed condition. You can see the 4 retention basins located along the south and east side of the development. Now I will provide a stormwater basin overview. This slide shows one of the 4 retention basins within the Celtic Crossing development to highlight the different components of the stormwater basin. The outlet control structure is shown in the left photo. The outlet pipe is connected to the outlet control structure and is underground, so obviously it's not shown in the photo. The extended detention volume is the volume above the normal pool of water, which is the volume of water in a non-rain condition that is available for runoff storage. The permanent pool and forebay are located within the normal pool of the basin. Drawdown time is a water quality requirement to allow for collected pollutants to settle down to the bottom of the basin prior to discharge through the outlet control structure. Retention basins have a 24-hour water quality drawdown time requirement. Aerators are recommended but not required for stormwater functionality of the basin. This is a detail of an outlet control structure for a retention basin. The normal pool within the basin is represented by the horizontal line on the right side of the detail. If you were to extend that line to the left on the screen, it would match the invert of the lower opening on the vertical pipe, which is setting the normal pool elevation of the basin. There is a submerged pipe shown at the bottom of the detail that connects the retention basin to the outlet control structure. When it rains, the water level in the basin begins to rise and water begins to discharge through the lower opening on the vertical pipe. Water will discharge through the higher opening on the vertical pipe as well as the top of the outlet control structure if the water level in the basin reaches those elevations. The number and size of openings are determined by stormwater calculations to satisfy both water quantity and water quality requirements. This slide shows a detention basin within the Wellington Reserve residential development. The photo on the left shows the outlet control structure. The outlet pipe is connected to the outlet control structure and is underground, so again, you can't see that in the photo. The main difference between this detention basin and a retention basin is there is no normal pool. The extended detention volume is the volume within the basin that is available for runoff storage. Detention basins have the same drawdown time requirement with the exception that the required time is 48 hours. This is a detail of an outlet control structure for a detention basin. The main difference in this detail is the absence of a normal pool. When it rains, water accumulates in the basin. Initially, the water can either soak into the ground through the rock section and enter the outlet control structure through the underdrain, or enter the outlet control structure directly through the opening set at the bottom of the basin. The openings within and on the outside of the outlet control structure begin to discharge water once the water level reaches those elevations. Similar to the retention basin outlet control structure, the number and size of openings are determined by stormwater calculations to satisfy both water quantity and water quality requirements. So are there any questions on the information that has been presented up to this point? Okay. And now Todd will provide an inventory of stormwater basins for residential developments. Todd, I think you're on mute.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I was having Zoom troubles. I believe I need to go through the commission and individually ask everyone if they have questions. Okay.
Yeah, Steve, if
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah. So I just wrote down names the way they showed up on my screen. So first one, Tom, you have any questions?
The only question I have is on the master plan. I don't remember if we talked about this or not, but on the master plan, it was last updated in 2009. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there any plans or is it necessary to look at that again in the near future or no?
We currently don't have plans to take a look at the master plan. That's something that we can talk about more internally. Just looking at the weather patterns, we can kind of compare that to what the master plan prescribed release rates are to see if it warrants taking a further look at that. Because I know over the past several years, it's getting wetter and wetter. So that's certainly something that we could potentially look into in the future.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, this is Todd. I work on the stormwater management function. We will look at the stormwater master plan. It's probably going to be next year with our operating budget funding coming for next year. Once we get that approved through our operating budget, this year for 2021.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay,
That's
Dee.
all I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Tom. Dee, you have any questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
To our newbie, Jim, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I had a comment I wanted to make.
Sure.
First of all, I feel really honored to be part of this commission. I've been in Dublin for over 25 years, and we've lived in many different areas around the United States, including areas like Overland Park, Kansas, and, Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and Dublin is definitely, I feel, the most well-managed city of any I've been exposed to. And again, we've been here 25 years and very impressed. So the comments or questions I have around the topics and things are really designed to stay in line with the mission, try to do the best we can. So I just wanted to ask a question to Michael around the Wellington Reserve example that you provided. We've been in Wellington Place. We were one of the first 5 houses, I think 6 houses there 25 years ago. We have the two ponds in the front of the Brand Road there. I like what Wellington Reserve is starting to appear to look like now with the natural grasslands and all the birds and everything. And I think it's really been good to allow that to grow, to allow some of that erosion and sedimentation to stop. But you mentioned a 48-hour exception run. Is an exception for 48 hours for the runoff in that particular basin because of the unique nature of that basin there?
That's actually an EPA requirement and also a City of Dublin requirement for water quality. So there needs to be a minimum drawdown time. So if you think about it, when it rains, when water fills up the basin, if the water immediately just discharges through the basin and downstream, that wouldn't give the basin the opportunity to have the pollutants settle down from the water, so that you're not discharging muddy water, pollutant water downstream. So that's the intent behind the drawdown time requirement. So for the dry basin, that requirement is 48 hours, and for wet basins, that's 24 hours.
Okay, that helps. I mean, the reason I asked the question, and I'm speaking from a resident for the neighborhood there, the Dublin pond that we have, particularly the one where the runoff from the Wellington Reserve goes into that pond. Last year, you probably were aware that there was a tremendous amount of muddy water that would be created in that pond, and as a result of the runoff. But the algae that formed last year was totally, away from what Dublin normally has as standards. And I know there's lots of issues around algae control with chemical usage and the lack of reduction in usage of chemicals over time and such. But I felt like if Dublin is like managing that particular pond, I just felt that it was very low as far as its quality around the water. Basically, I do a lot of fishing, and the algae started to become created early in the summer, and it was a very kind of dangerous algae. I actually called one of your team members, and they said that the subcontractors would come out and would try to work on it. But by the midsummer, it was pretty much covered over completely. So it was unfishable, unsightly, didn't seem to fit the Dublin standards compared to some of the other ponds that may even be privately managed. And I just was wondering if there was some discussion about that, or do ponds like that show up as not meeting the Dublin standard and there's changes made the following year, or how does that work?
Todd, do you want to jump on just in your experience with just the different residents that have contacted you about the condition of the residential basins?
Yeah, it's only my only personal experience from being an avid fisherman on that pond, and then basically covered.
Yeah, hey Jim, this is Todd again. Hey, we do get a lot of routine calls for algae issues, and that is a large part of this discussion, which kind of leads me into my part of the presentation is the algae, the mud and the silt that gets into the bottom of these basins, ones that are wet versus the ones that are dry. Well, I'll talk about a few examples here tonight. That is one of the big components. We're working on financing and getting funds to do these types of fixes, to get rid of that algae, to get proper pond depth, to get a good healthy pond, that's really what one of our driving topics is one of those, that component. Okay. It kind of drives funding, quality, quantity, all of that good stuff we're trying to achieve. We do have, some older ponds that, don't achieve that, and some newer ponds. It's a great mixture of the basins themselves. But that's really what we're here for, that's one of the components.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I bring it up just from the standpoint, I know I read tried to read, it was intimidating, but I tried to read all the pages of the presentation and read all the notes. And I know the committee members here have gone through an amazing amount of work to this point. It's just that I just wanted to make that comment and statement or observation around that particular pond, which is sort of my own single observation that I have as a person of one.
Any other questions, Jim?
That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, any questions?
None at this time.
Okay, thank you. Vivek, any questions?
Not at this time, but I'll take an opportunity to welcome the new members at this time.
Very good.
And thank you.
Okay, and next on my list is our other newbie, Mr. Gasson. Gary, any questions?
I'm all set at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, and as the chair, I'm all set too. So on to our next presentation, please.
Yeah, so hello, good evening. My name is Todd Garwick, City of Dublin, engineering. My specialty is utilities, which does involve residential stormwater basins. So I'm here to talk about stormwater basin inventory with focus on the residential stormwater basins serving the following different types of developments in both private and public areas. Residential stormwater basins exist in the following scenarios. Single-family subdivisions such as Riviera, Ballantrae, Dublinshire, Wyandotte Woods, and single-family, also single-family detached homes, examples such as the cottages at Ballantrae, the villas at Ballantrae are a few examples. And in the condominium realm is like the lakes at Ballantrae neighborhood, woodlands at Ballantrae, and I'm sorry if everybody doesn't know all these names. If you want more examples, I can give you some more information on where these locations are. But I just kind of rattle some examples that are throughout our community. And also, our last example was apartment complexes. The Asherton apartments, the Teller Flats is the new one up in the Bridge Park area, and even in the residences at Scioto Crossing, which is up off on the road area, just to kind of give you some perspective of where some of these are. So next slide will show the breakdown of ownership of the residential stormwater basins. Within Dublin, there are 305 residential stormwater basins and growing, with new projects coming along. These numbers exclude all the commercial stormwater basins, which is roughly 270 stormwater basins. So you see the number of basins, we're approaching 600 basins in Dublin. So we're pretty healthy on stormwater management. The 305 residential stormwater basins further breaks down into half owned by the City of Dublin and half privately owned, as you can see here in the drop downs to the arrows to both left and right. The ownership is determined by the property parcel ownership in which the residential stormwater basin resides according to the Dublin GIS database. So we have a large database that we put together and track all these new, all the existing basins that we're keeping track of us, all that we own and what everybody else owns. So for the City of Dublin owned residential stormwater basins, which are mostly dedicated to the City of Dublin as part of reserves, open spaces, and by easement on recorded plats during the development processes. Michael showed the example earlier with the Celtic Crossing example. The 151 privately owned basins are mostly dedicated by plat, for example, in Muirfield Village to the association. In other cases like condominiums near the Woodlands of Ballantrae, the apartment example, Asherton, the single family detached homes such as the cottage of Ballantrae. As well, I mentioned that earlier as well. So those are kind of the breakdown of the privately owned and the City of Dublin owned. We'll talk more about the types of basins. So the breakdown of the 151 privately owned residential stormwater basin types is as follows. There are 29 detention dry basins. There are 62 retention and wet basins, 32 aesthetic wet basins, 13 parking lot basins, and 15 underground storage dry basins. So that breaks down the private section, which we're not overly concerned with because we're more concerned about the public sector. So I'm going to jump more into the City of Dublin owned basin types, which is our next slide. Yeah. We have 94 retention wet basins. Like I spoke before, and Riviera, Belvedere, Hawksnest has those examples, which are prominent. And then we have 48 detention dry basins, such as Kaufman Reserve, Wellington Reserve, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, and Coventry Woods even has, a dry basin. And then we have 11 aesthetic ponds. For example, we have a project going on in the Brandon Park up by the treetops area, which those aesthetic ponds they have storage volume, but they don't have a stormwater control on them. Those are probably an older basin, when I say like the Muirfield Village Golf Course area has those, which are a lot of uncontrolled runoff areas. And we have lastly one bio detention basin, which is in Oak Park along McKittrick Road at the entrance off of McKittrick Road into the Oak Park development. It's one of our fews. We have that's a very different type basin. Not very noticeable, has lots of high grass growing out of it, which is just its component, but it looks very much different from everything else we have. So jumping down into maintenance responsibility. As you look further into the 154 Dublin noted residential stormwater basins, the stormwater basin maintenance responsibility shows 46 of the 154 stormwater basins are maintained by private/homeowner associations on Dublin-owned properties, and 108 of the 154 residential stormwater basins are maintained by Dublin. You see, as you guys can see, I'm sorry, I'm looking at just kind of gives you the breakdown of the basins that we have and the types and who maintains them. So the determination of the maintenance of the residential stormwater basins has evolved from HOA/private to Dublin over the years, in Dublin primarily through the development process and occasional requests from an HOA for relief of maintenance responsibilities. The city has heard from some HOAs over the past years that stormwater basin maintenance can be a financial burden, along with maintaining reserve areas and its components. So the history of practices is kind of how all these developed is what you see on the screen here. Is prior to 1999, there was HOA ownership and maintenance. And then when we reached 1999 to about 2015, there was City of Dublin ownership, and some HOAs inherited the maintenance component of the basin. In 2015 to present, we're trending towards City of Dublin ownership of the ground and also maintenance of the ground, the basins that surround it, such as Greystone Mews has a nice little picture there, but you can also see the algae, so you can see the maintenance that's needed there as well. This is kind of the basis for kind of why we're formalizing our discussion tonight is, those 46 basins, that are maintained by HOAs of the 154 we have. So I'll talk about jump into retention, wet basin maintenance. It's very important to the overall quality of the basin. Some retention wet basins in Dublin possess various storm sewer pipes into and out of the basin. See the Wellington Place picture, there's no pipes coming in or out. The pipes in or out are actually, buried underneath the water level, and because just how we like to not have those structures visibly, because sometimes people think they're an eyesore. So maintenance here is, in cleaning those pipes is storm sewer structures and pipe require Vector cleaning and jetting out the storm sewers. So those are our maintenance component we have. Pond dredging. Pond dredging is needed for the depth maintenance to prevent algae formation and plant formation. Several retention wet basins have a safety shelf 10 feet into the basin for people to have a chance to stand if they fall or slip into the basin. Maintaining the depth is important for the basin overall appearance and health. Like Jim talked about earlier, we have that little 2-foot shelf he was asking about. In some of the basins, you can see the algae forming in that 10 to 15 foot area. And that's why we have that shallow depth, but we have that shallow depth, that 2 foot, right there. The algae is forming, but we also have that shelf for a safety feature for people, kids, so you don't just fall into the basin and fall off the shelf, go straight down to 6 or 8 feet down. So we have a lot of that design mechanism in our stormwater drainage manual to have that shelf for huge safety purposes. Other maintenance practices are basin areas. Fountains are considered the aesthetic component to the basin, as shown in the picture. Mowing and vegetation control will also keep the basin healthy and maintain the side slopes. Chemical control is used for algae control. However, our EPA is moving away from these practices in the next permit cycle. So they're really going to be cracking down on using algicide and other chemicals, to get rid of the algae. So, maintenance and depth of the basins is a big component for everybody. And also nuisance animals, basin maintenance, such as beavers and fish can block the stormwater control structures, outlet. Tartan West area, we had a recently experienced the beaver activity. Maybe some of you heard where we had beavers basically chopping down trees and basically clogging the outlet of the stormwater pond. We're still unfortunately dealing with them. They are back in full force. I just heard about today, so it's been fun. Riverside Woods, we've had over there in the Riverside Woods development, we had a carp clogged in the little 3-inch orifice, which controls the pond level. He was in there for probably about a year or so, which made the water level rise about 1.5 feet and give the neighborhood kind of a false sense of what the actual water level is. So another maintenance component for wet basins. Flip over to detention dry basin maintenance components. Detention basin dry basin has different components which are mostly visible, unlike a retention basin. You will see later that most of our work to date is performed on detention basins. Storm sewer pipes and structures are visible, and in most cases, when there is a problem, the pipe or structures are covered with debris, leaves, mulch, grass, stone, gravel from the storm sewer system upstream, which leads you can see in the picture here in the Dublin Sire example, you can see the grass clippings laying in it. That only, if that doesn't, it eventually clogs up on that pipe, which is at the bottom of the picture there you see. And in that area, twigs, soccer balls, basketballs, everything gets in there, pumpkins, 2 liters, the kids are always ingenious with clogging them. But a lot of the sediment and debris is our major culprit when we're fixing these. Grading can be an important component when the debris, branches, mud rocks get into the detention basin and block the stormwater out, and even change the side slopes bottoms, which in turn decreases the volume of water that can be stored in the basin. So you can see the clogged, can clog the outlet, and then we have flooding, which is overtopping of the basin walls in dry basin situations. Channels, concrete, stone. We have this one. This is an example of Devonshire on an older stormwater design method, which is not used in our current stormwater drainage design manual. You can see the debris in the channel, which causes the maintenance for Dublin and for HOAs. And we also have underdrains, are a necessary component within detention dry basins to drain the bottom of the basin and prevent standing water from the slopes within the basin. Do not always remove the storm water. So, say for instance, you would have instead of the channel in this location, you would have like a 4-inch perforated tile underneath the bottom of where the bottom slope is to drain the bottom out of the basin, to keep the water flowing, water stand, so we don't have mosquitoes and keep it healthy. And also another component for maintenance for these is mowing and vegetation. You can see in the Devonshire example, you see how the high grass, grows around the inlet and outlet, but if it doesn't get mowed and maintained, those things, look like hay fields. They'll clog and plug the outlets, which in turn causes more problems within the basin itself down the road. Lastly, trash removal. Talked a little bit about that. Pops, 2 liters, basketballs, tennis balls. You name it. It shows up in the basins. So estimated maintenance costs. Retention wet basins. So this is kind of what we're estimating. We're talking about $25,000 to $50,000 per basin on a frequency of about 20 to 25 years. Kind of in a per year accumulation of what we think it's going to take to maintain a retention wet basin. And then detention basins, a little bit less costly, $15,000 to $20,000, maybe a frequency of about 5 or 10 years to maintain it. And the routine aesthetic maintenance, and, treatments, $1,000 per basin per year is what we do with our own internal and aerators. You can see the electrical cost are $2,300 a year for it. So every fountain you see running there, and you're talking about $2,300 a year to run it. So it is expensive to run those. And you see the replacement costs. This is what our Parks Department, they run these. They're about $7,000 per unit, and they only last about 8 years. So you can see the expense start to build up a little bit. All right. So maintenance costs, some capital funds examples. Waterford Village, Long Branch, which is not pictured, involved, I don't have a picture of this, but we involve grading, tree removal, outlet control, structure repair, typicals of the maintenance, the dry basin maintenance practices I mentioned earlier. And then more importantly, you look at this one here, the Wedgwood Hills, which is the top picture on the right. Wedgwood Hills in the Lime Court area. Took us about a week. It cost us about $18,000. We did some grading in the bottom of it, some seeding. We had some material, debris removal on the outlet. So it takes a lot of equipment and a lot of time and labor to clean these out and keep them functioning and flowing. So that $18,000 cost is kind of more in line with the cost I showed a little bit earlier. And this one here, the next one, in the 2015 stormwater maintenance contract, the Woodlands subdivision, which is up Tonti Drive off of Riverside Drive, did about 3 days of work. You can see the high grass kind of in the middle of the low grass area. There's a concrete channel in there, and I think we're going to be on our 4th round actually this year to clean out the debris, rocks, stone, leaves, twigs, branches in that channel. And it's actually caused some downstream flooding issues. So those are just examples of those are probably the 3 that we've hit more recently. You can see the costs and the time, materials, to work on those basins, so it's coming. So capital improvements, our stormwater funds. This is where our current funding is. Was in 2020 was in storm structure repair, which is about $250,000 a year, and that's primarily focused on curb and gutter inlets. So when you see us cutting around the stormwater structures in town, replacing the asphalt, replacing the curb, we're fixing the structure, the damage underneath the structure itself. The blocks are falling out, so we don't want the structures, those steel frames and grates will drop down. They can cause some problems. The stormwater maintenance contract is where we do storm sewer pipes, structure repairs, various other places, and ditch maintenance. We'll do a little, side ditch maintenance or ditch maintenance in parks. And if everybody noticed, we did Dari Fields a couple years ago. It was a huge ditch maintenance project. That was the funds used for that. And then we have various other stormwater improvements, on the books that we perform work on. So on all total, you can see we have about $925,000 a year currently budgeted. And that's what we have right now. So, but our primary focus is the stormwater maintenance contract that's highlighted in red. That's where we use the funds for the stormwater basin maintenance, as we get calls in, get complaints. That's where that funding is to take care of that stuff. All right, benchmarking, looking at other communities. Homeowners Association maintenance. So we recently, Dublin staff reached out to several central agencies for feedback on their residential stormwater basin maintenance practices. And the agencies listed here responded that the HOAs are responsible for the residential stormwater basin maintenance. Grove City, Marysville, Westerville, Worthington have primarily put the maintenance on basins on the HOAs. So their cities are not heavily involved in the actual basin maintenance practices. All right. We also did some benchmarking information relative to stormwater utilities. How do other agencies or cities fund the stormwater basin maintenance? Stormwater utility fees are an option that some communities utilize as a source for funding. 33 agencies were surveyed, and 56% of the 33 agencies have a stormwater utility fee. You can see the chart on the right. The ones that do have, they have a fee associated with it. The fees are based on an equivalent residential unit, which is a square footage determined by each municipality based generally on impervious areas. So hard surface types like housing footprints, driveways, patios. And Dublin is one of the 33 surveyed, and you will see that Dublin does not have a stormwater utility fee, along with some of the other agencies in Columbus area and their fees. So jumping to the next slide, you can see the benchmarking for the communities that have a fee. Columbus being the most expensive, to Shawnee Hills being one of the least expensive. And of course, you see that those not collecting a fee are Westerville, Worthington, and Dublin. Now that we discuss funding options, let's look at the residential stormwater basin maintenance option presented by CSAC to Dublin City Council. And I'm going to pause here and let everyone run through, ask questions. Steve?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I will go through my list again. Tom, you have any questions?
I don't at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Dee, any questions?
Yes, I have one question. You had a slide early on that was that looked at the categories versus who's doing the maintenance and whatnot. And I thought I saw, and I could be wrong, that's why I'm asking the question. I thought I saw that the aesthetic basins were being maintained by the city already. Is that the case? Is that correct?
Yes, we have some, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I asked that is because it looked like Dublin was maintaining all of the ones that were designated as aesthetic wet. And I know that was a question that came up in that discussion with City Council, as far as specifically related to who maintains aesthetic things, because they only are aesthetic to the people who live in that neighborhood. And that was a question that came up in City Council. So I just wanted to kind of put that in the notes as something to go back to if we consider fees for these things, because right now we're already doing the maintenance on those aesthetic basins.
Yeah, what you got to read, Dee, I'll give you a little example is, so there are privately maintained aesthetic basins, and those examples are like Muirfield Village, okay? The village, Muirfield Village, around the Muirfield Village Golf Club, they have basins, but they are maintained by the like Muirfield Association, okay?
Okay.
All right, so they're in that 151, privately owned component. These are focused on the 154 publicly owned ground and with an aesthetic component, wet. So they don't have any stormwater function. Okay.
Okay.
So there are both components. Okay. Both privately maintained aesthetic and publicly maintained aesthetic. As both, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Dee, and Todd, just to clarify, I think I have the correct slide up here on the screen.
Yeah.
I think to Dee's point, of the 46 that we're really focused on and we're discussing here as sort of the topic of tonight's discussion, none of those 46 are solely aesthetic, correct? They all serve some sort of stormwater retention purpose.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Indeed, that was essentially what you were asking.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Dee, is that it? Okay, you want to unmute, so I assume it is. Jim, any questions?
Yeah, I had two quick questions. Thank you. First of all, congrats on that Brandon Park pond that you're revising. That's going to be amazing when that's done. Fantastic. Thank you. I did have a question, as again, my fishing perspective. The pond, Tom, that is on the west side there, that is starting to, that was 100% covered with algae last year. I understand that the ledge concept. I understand that EPA also will no longer be allowing a lot of chemical shocking to take place. There's about a 10 or 15% portion of that pond now, based on the low level of water beyond the ledge, that's already starting to become stagnant, and you start to see things happening there that's going to get worse as the summer goes on. How does the contractor determine when something needs to be dredged to maintain the quality of the appearance of the pond like that?
Yeah, those are what we are trying to work on to get things on a more regular maintenance, so we can clean, get rid of the algae. There's other components we can add to the basins. There's there's aerators, but there's other components we can do to help with the algae. Getting past the algicide component is going to be tough. We're going to be looking at more, I think, mechanical component treatment, like the aerators, bubblers. There's a couple other components that we're looking at, to add to ponds. Say, for instance, the balance tray, we're adding more aerators and bubblers, to get rid of the algae. We're going to be looking at more mechanical components, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've already pulled.
And probably, Jim, to your question about the dredging, we have discussed that, and probably what's going to happen is, we're going to need to start assessing our ponds and doing an evaluation. There's a couple different engineering companies that do that, and basically taking the record plans and looking at the depth, and really just, it's quite honestly just simply putting someone in a boat with a rod and measuring what the depth of the pond is presently, and seeing how much sediment has accumulated in the bottom of the pond, because there really just isn't any other way short of draining the pond, which we certainly don't want to do. But given Dublin's age, we're just starting to talk about that.
I see. Thank you. That's great. By the way, I did pull out a 19-inch largemouth the other night from that pond. So,
oh wow,
alive and well right now. So,
was that for dinner tonight?
Yeah. My wife wouldn't. I don't think my wife would be too keen on that, but she was there actually with the dog, and she got a chance to verify that I am a real fisherman.
All right, good.
My other quick question regarding, like, we went out and drove around to see some of these places the other night. Corazon, which I believe is some of the ponds in question that might be some of the 46. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But if it is, and if it is taken over by Dublin, would that mean that those individuals out there would get, of course, some relief from a pricing standpoint, but also it would become Dublin public, so that the fishermen that are interested in fishing those areas would then be able to bring their cars in, set up shop, get the lawn chairs out, and fish in some of those intimate ponds that are contained within Corazon? Is that how that would work? Is that the trade-off?
Ooh, that's a good question for planning and zoning. I think they're still, the ones we're focusing on are on public ground, the ground that city of Dublin owns. So I think there wouldn't be any restrictions, I don't think.
Yeah, they're on city-owned property. So as long as they're on city-owned property, we don't restrict public access or fishing, on ones that the city owns. Now, if they are on privately owned property, that's a different story.
Mm-hmm. I need to go back and look. I thought I saw no fishing signs on some of those Corazon ponds. And I know I saw one on the large one as you enter into the property, but some of the smaller ones I think had no fishing too, but I may be mistaken.
Yeah, Jim, I've been out there a lot lately dealing with Tartan West, and they have signs everywhere, and they are a very active group, I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm. You mean as far as restricting fishing and such, or?
Yes. Yeah, fishing and maintenance, they're active on all fronts. The Tartan group is. They're a nice group to work on, but they're trying to give us more of their basins. Yeah, they have the mixture of privately owned basin, private maintenance, right next to a public ground owned basin with HOA maintenance. They have the complete mixture of what we're talking about. So they have one of those 46 basins that we're focusing on here.
I see. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, any questions?
Yeah, I wasn't quick enough. So of the major municipalities, Westerville, Dublin, and who is the third city that does not charge fees?
I think it's Nick. Hey, Nick, can you go back up? Yeah, Worthington.
So are they on par with the same number of, so we have 350 plus stormwater basins, and then some are wet and some are whatever. Are they on par with the number? Does Westerville and Worthington have a similar numeric grouping as Dublin does?
Ooh, I do not know the answer. I'll have to get the answer to that question. I do not know what they have number wise. We can get that though.
Yeah, we can find out. I'm gonna guess Worthington has fewer ponds than we do. Probably the most comparable might be Westerville. Just given the age of the community and kind of its development pattern is probably more similar to Dublin's.
And it was a two-part question. Sorry, Steve, I forgot to announce that at the beginning. And the second part is if they're not in, there's no corollary between Westerville and Worthington's number of ponds to what Dublin has, and Dublin decides to do a fee, of the other municipalities that I would say maybe fall into the similar category as far as numeric numbers of ponds, and Dublin decided to start charging a fee on those, you know, I think there might need to be kind of a study that says, well, the reason Columbus charges X amount is they have 500 ponds or they have 100 ponds. Because I think you'll start to split hairs with the residents if they go, well, but we only have this many ponds and we're paying, you know, $75. I'm just making things up now.
Yeah.
But,
No, good, very good point. Let me help you out with what they're charging fees are is not solely for stormwater basins. Okay, there is an all-encompassing function. You know, they're looking at the stormwater structures. You know, the pipes, catch basins, curb and gutter inlets. You know, that's what they're including all of that and stormwater basins themselves. You know, as a collective whole in the system. That's the fee. So they're looking at everybody in the city. They're charging that fee, you know, so that can cover the cost to do maintenance on all of the stormwater infrastructure, including the basins. So they use that funding mechanism, you know, to do their maintenance holistically in all these communities. Whether it's project specific or, you know, general maintenance, they've got it all lumped together, but they break it out in budget factors or like little pockets to do the components of their maintenance on their stormwater system.
and then how does that stormwater fee affect our water? Because we also have, if you ever notice your water bill, you have the Columbus water, Columbus sewer, and then you have Dublin water, Dublin sewer. Would this be an additional cost if Dublin decided to add this fee to that billing?
Yes, that is precisely where that shows up. Yes, it shows up, you know, it's an equivalent residential unit, so it's based upon, you know, an impervious area, and they charge that per equivalent residential unit. So it could be 2 or 3 units. So you might get, you know, on a per month, quarterly basis, basically what our bill is, you might get, you know, another $12 or $13, $15 per quarter on that water and sewer bill. You know, it just depends on who you are, what your fee is. I mean, what your utility fee rate is.
Okay, I'm finished, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Vivek, any questions?
Yes, I think I want to bring up I watched the Dublin City presentation of this one. The council member, they hesitant to, you know, increase the price, you know, for the residents, since because, you know, everything is already settled on the property. So one of the thing I think I asked you guys in one of the meeting is can we get the number from HOA, how much they are exclusively spending on this particular pond, the 46 ponds on, you know, like on those 46 ponds. So that is that, you know, if we try to maintain, the city maintains it, then we need to take our, I mean, that money has to come directly to, City of Dublin. So that the question is, I mean, what other alternative? Because we were talking about, like increasing the bills on the water bill. Is there any other alternative? Is there any other practices with other cities nationwide, not in the Columbus, as you know of?
Let me take a stab at that on both your questions. I did go back and look at the minutes, Vivek.
Sure.
And I saw where you asked that question about the HOAs and what they're spending. What we could probably do is sample a couple of them and ask, maybe 5 to 10 out of the 46 and see what numbers and information they might have on what they are spending on basin maintenance. That's probably going to be our best indicator, and if they voluntarily share that with us, and that's probably the best we could do with that. So that might help guide you. So hopefully. And then what was the second part of your question? I was having a little trouble hearing.
We're talking about right now, one of the proposed to collect the money is like using discharges in the water bill, correct?
Okay.
Is it so? Is there any other way to collect it, like in the taxation or any other area that we can collect this money? Like is there any other opportunity and any other way to collect the money?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good question because we've had that same discussion internally. And the honest answer is that short of using general fund revenue, which in our case would be our income tax dollars, that we collect, stormwater utility really in the innovative way of funding stormwater improvements, both maintenance and capital cost. One of the things that if you went back and reviewed the council meeting, the mayor indicated like special improvement districts. A lot of those are really somewhat difficult to implement because they are a set district. So to kind of set up a district for 46 different basins would be pretty laborious. Typically special improvement districts are done like, for instance, a good example would be like Bridge Park, where you had necessary infrastructure for a development. Either a special improvement district or a transportation improvement district would be created to fund those sort of improvements. So you really don't see that in stormwater funding itself. And the other difficulty with the stormwater utility discussion is it has much broader implications than just really these 46 basins. I mean, you're instituting a utility that most communities use for not only basin maintenance, but maintenance of catch basins and pipes and ditches, any other stormwater component, even street sweeping. City of Columbus uses their collected stormwater fees, utility fees for street sweeping because it has impacts on stormwater quality. So they've come up with creative ways of how to use that money, but in terms of creative funding mechanisms, we're really limited. And that's part of the conversation that we were talking about having, that CSAC maybe needs to get clarity from City Council as we get into the next portion of this discussion, is about the whole funding piece, because, and we'll leave that for a few minutes, but I think that's kind of leads us to what we're going to talk about next.
Okay, that's fine. So, okay, I didn't know that it's coming up. So,
no,
okay, yeah,
that was a good lead in. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Gary, any questions?
I'm good.
Okay, just back to what Vivek was asking, I would assume that'd be a major next step. What are these different ways to finance, the stormwater, those 46 stormwater basins. But I do have a question too, and that is, I was curious, there's like 4 cities that you presented that have the HOA exclusively support their own, those 4. Okay, so 2 questions here. Are those on private land or public land, or don't we know, or is a mixture?
I think what we gathered from them was, so in subdivision developments, The residential component, the basin maintenance is given to the homeowners association. So the city doesn't have, and the residential component, they don't have the maintenance of the basins in the individual developments, like
But
Celtic Crossing.
Right, but who owns the land? In like Grove City, does all the developments own their own land or their own basins, or is it public land? Like,
It's probably a mixture. I don't have that specific, but it's probably a mixture, just like we are.
I'm going to guess it's a mixture, and I'm also going to guess when I had conversations with the city of Delaware, part of their utility fee structure and what they had to do when they instituted the stormwater utility fee, they did not own the property where the basins were located. So they had to go back to all the HOAs and establish right of entry agreements and easements to be able to allow access to these basins and ponds, which took a considerable amount of time. So that's actually an advantage that we have, that years ago we started, having the property put in the city's name. But that was a huge endeavor on their part to just get access to the ponds themselves. So to answer your question, Steve, I think generally speaking, the cities don't own the underlying fee or own the property where the basins are located.
okay. So I guess to Nick, are we done with presentations, talking about next steps, or is there something else you want to present to us?
I think we're generally at a point of discussion. Todd, I know that my understanding was the last few slides that we do have here were really to sort of tee us up for that discussion. Is that correct? Do you guys you don't necessarily have any sort of new or refresher information outside of sort of what CSAC discussed at the last meeting before the recommendation went to council?
Yeah, I think that's where we were trying to lead into what Marilyn presented at the February 24th council meeting, was, at the time, the CSAC was recommending that we take over the 46, and then city council came back with a lot of questions. So here's our recommendation. Dublin maintain the existing 108 residential stormwater basins. Dublin assume maintenance of the existing 46 residential stormwater basins that are currently maintained by HOAs. And then moving forward, new residential stormwater basins, Dublin would maintain, everything going forward. So it's essentially putting all the maintenance, on the city of Dublin, in the residential realm. So we would own the fee on the ground, we would own the ground, we would own the maintenance, we would basically take on everything. And of course that leads to the funding option, or funding issue, I should say.
Yeah, so Steve, just to your point, and I think to sort of tee up this discussion for you all, is I think it's important, everybody I think had the opportunity to sort of watch city council's discussion on this topic. So, what you as a commission decided back in, I believe January or February, one of the two, was, you thought it was appropriate, we all felt it was appropriate to assume the maintenance of these 46 basins that were on public property, but were currently being maintained privately by HOAs. And that recommendation was made to city council. They had a discussion around it. And I think what you probably saw from the different council members was a difference probably in opinion about, just general sort of maintenance and responsibility of those ponds. There was varying degrees of interest in pursuing this option, but ultimately when it got to the discussion around, okay, if this is an appropriate thing for the city to take over, how do we fund it? And I think what you probably saw there was, okay, let's give that back to CSAC and have them maybe figure that out. So I think what would be prudent for you all to have a discussion about is just generally some of the comments and some of the takeaways you felt and had from that council discussion, and maybe just reaffirm amongst each other whether or not you believe that your recommendation still remains the same, to take over those 46 basins, with the understanding that if that is the recommendation and that is where the commission stands still, that the next step for you all is to then figure out, okay, what is your recommendation for a funding mechanism? Because what you heard from council was, okay, we generally think that this is appropriate, but we don't want it to go as a unfunded mandate. We need to figure out some way to fund this increase in maintenance. And so, you know, that would be the next discussion, but I do think it would be prudent with new members and with, you know, a general idea of where some of that council discussion ended up, to just quickly at least have a discussion about, okay, how do we think that went? And where are we as a commission? How do we stand currently on this issue? So I think now is a good opportunity to bring that up. And I'll pull the presentation off for now, just so everybody can sort of see each other and you all could have a discussion for a few minutes here to take on some of those topics.
If I could just interject, it's Paul Hammersmith. How many of the commission members watched the 30 minutes of the council, you know, both the presentation and the council discussion on February 24th? Did everybody go through and review it?
Yes.
So what were maybe your takeaways from that discussion?
Well, one thing it was Chris, you know, the mayor saying, you know, let's look at creative ways of doing this. And she brought up SIDS, and that Paul just, you know, talked about SIDS. I guess I felt at a disadvantage. I'm not sure what all these possibilities are. Kind of to a question that Vivek was asking, like, how do other communities outside of Ohio do this or fund these things? So I think it'd behoove us, maybe somebody from finance could talk to us at our next meeting and present, you know, here's some options, you know, because it's beyond, you know, I don't know what I don't know. So that's what I took. And then another observation, since I guess I have the floor right now, you know, Greg was very adamant about, you know, he didn't want to see, you know, a new tax, you know, and he was very cost conscious about, you know, how this money would, you know, if it would hit, you know, individual households that, you know, I think he viewed it as very negative. So those are just things I saw or observed. Anyone else?
Yeah, Steve, this is Tom. A couple of things, and it's, yeah, it was interesting with the meeting, and even more so because it was a month before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's where that comes into play is, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but budgets are going to get extremely tight for all public entities, and corporate, everybody's budgets are going to get tight, and public entities in particular are really going to get hit hard. There just was a long time with no revenue.
Right. We're monitoring that very closely right now, but is that possible? Yes. We don't know to what extent. I mean, We're planning on a 20% reduction right now, but our finance director is keeping very close track of that presently.
So herein lies the problem, is that, you know, to adequately resolve what we're talking about requires money. So where it comes from, that's the next question. So I really don't want to spend a ton of time going through and having the engineering department and Paul and his staff and everybody spending more and more and more time on something. So it really comes down to, and Steve, to your point too, is that, all right, if we put a fee on, there's got to be a study done. I don't know if there's other fees within the city where a study will be done that it could piggyback on or be looked at. But if there's absolutely no interest from council of having it looked at, then we're kind of at a standstill. The problem is that budgets are going to potentially get tight. The maintenance is not going to go away. The problems with the ponds and everything else are going to get exacerbated. And if you've got a tighter and tighter budget, I don't know how you're going to get everything done. plus the fact and I don't know if you guys are seeing it from the engineering department standpoint, but with these tremendous rains, when we're getting 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain at a time within a 24-hour time span, it's the open ditch beside my house. I pulled out 7 wheelbarrow fulls of gravel. I don't know where that's coming from. Plus there's bricks. Well, that's telling me something's breaking down somewhere, but I mean, I guess I should call you guys to have it come out and scoped or something, but so, but you see where I'm heading with this is that, you know, it's if council is really interested in having a study done on, and unfortunately, I think one of the few ways that you can do this is a stormwater fee. I'm not really aware of, if we're out in an unincorporated area, yeah, you've got a whole lot of different things you can do. It's ditch maintenance, but in the city, you don't. You're very limited as to what you can do. So, but it really, we kind of need to toss it back to council a little bit as to, yeah, I'll be more than happy to continue looking at this, but if there's interest there, sure. If they're really hesitant about not wanting to put another fee on or anything, there's really no point in us continuing, really. I mean, we can move on to another discussion topic because there's, you know, hopefully I'm not talking in circles and I'm not offending anybody, but it's just, I think we need to figure out, okay, if we're serious about looking at a fee, I don't have the wherewithal to do that. I don't think Paul wants to do that, and I'm pretty sure Nick, you don't either. But that's why you have to hire a consultant to come in and do that. Just looking at this fee alone, I don't think would warrant it. If hiring a consultant to do that, if there's other fees that they're potentially looking at, maybe that's the time to piggyback that on and take a look. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
And I think, Tom, we share your concern as staff has talked about it. And, you know, the pandemic was probably good that it gave us a time to pause after February 24th and your March 10th meeting to kind of mull this over and think about, you know, where do we go forward from here? And we talked about that at the end of the day, if council really doesn't have an interest in a stormwater utility fee, then there really isn't much point in going through the exercise of evaluating that. Because having gone through that, I did that several years ago in Delaware. I got the enabling legislation passed, and it was very rigorous to get through. And they just didn't have any other alternatives in funding their stormwater improvements. But it took a long time to get through that process. And a lot of committee meetings, they had a public works committee that actually took that up. At the end of the day, if there really isn't any interest in it, then there really is no point in traveling down that road.
Right.
At all. And that is where really would be good guidance from council. And if at the end of the day, they don't want to set a precedent with taking over these 46 basins because of the funding ramifications, then I think that's valid. But if that is their primary concern, then I think you should know that as well.
Right.
I'm not sure how to ask that question of council. And that's part of this discussion this evening is really trying to determine the road ahead and a plan of action that maybe an alternative is to go back and touch base with city council and say, we reviewed the discussion, you know, we took copious notes, we really talked a lot about it. Here's where we're struggling. You gave us direction to go back and look at creative funding mechanisms. And I did like the suggestion from Steve that maybe we do in September have our finance folks come in and talk about, hey, what are the funding mechanisms? At least you could look into that and be informed about it. Right. And say, guess what? We found out it's really limited. And now this is where this places us. It's a stormwater utility fee or the general fund, you know, and if you're not interested in either, then there really isn't much point in talking about it. And that changes our recommendation.
Correct.
So I think that's a very good discussion. But our point tonight is to do exactly what you're doing, is to talk about this, and you as a commission decide how you want to proceed forward.
And I wanted to bring up one more point. I thought might have been caught up on the Dublin City Council meeting. Remember we had only talked about the 46 ponds right now. And, whenever there's a maintenance call, cities going and helping them for free of charge, correct? So if you really look at it, I think that part of the property owners, they are enjoying the free ride from the rest of the population, really speaking. So because they may be paying for HOA, but I think, if at least if you're not taking the all 46, but if there is any kind of maintenance call coming from the HOA, so that city needs to charge them. Probably we need to come up with that.
But you have 108, I think, that do benefit from the city taking care of it at no cost. If I was those 46, I'm not sure why they're not there today. City council saying, hey, take it over, and there should be no cost because you do it for the other 100 plus retention ponds and detention ponds.
But that money currently is coming from somewhere, like from general fund or whatever, right. Currently, right?
Correct.
And it is indirectly, coming from the regular population. But I think there's a 46. The one is, I feel like we are spending more money on those ponds, compared to the rest of them. So if you need to look at like the overall, the future cost going to be increased, that is where probably may have to look at it, but at least we need to take care of the 46 one, has to, if you do any kind of maintenance, that has to be through the charge of the city of Dublin. At least if you're not, at least one kind of recommendation.
And did I not recall that there is nothing currently in, I don't know what we use, guidance, Nick, around new subdivisions coming on board and having this? Is that there's nothing that helps the city staff and the crew understand who would have to pay and who doesn't have to pay? Or is it new subdivisions, they get to pay unless they figure out somebody else around them doesn't pay? Wasn't there some ambiguity around the guidance around when you have these water areas?
I could probably answer that. And the answer is no. If you go back to our presentation and the information, our current practices is that we own the basins and we maintain them in new developments. So for instance, Riviera West, which hasn't yet gone under construction up near Dublin Jerome High School, that'll be that we will own the basin and we will maintain it. And that's our current practice in residential areas.
I think Elizabeth's asking, is there a funding mechanism for these new subdivisions that, like when these decisions are made, it's stated up front, well, the developer will give the city 50,000 put in escrow?
No, there's not, because that would be considered an impact fee, and you have to have enabling legislation to collect an impact fee from a developer, and then basically have a basis for that impact fee to do so. So the maintenance of, I guess the funding for the maintenance of those basins comes out of the general fund. Those numbers that Todd showed kind of towards the end of his presentation, that $900 and some $1,000, that's where that comes from. And that would get increased over time as the CIP is evaluated each year, the capital improvements program. So to answer your, I think everybody's concerned, over time, that amount's going to need to increase as we take on more basins, the city gets larger. That's just going to be a natural progression.
One of the things that I noticed from the discussion in City Council is there was a lot of pushback in different directions. They seemed they didn't want to accept this and go forward with this because they basically said, gee, we're not comfortable with accepting this as a recommendation. Let's toss it back since you were interested in maybe doing some more work on looking at fees and stuff. It would be useful to know if that's still their operating guidance right now. Do they really, given our current situation, we're now deeply into more budget cuts and things like that. So maybe framing a question just back to city council saying, this is the way you framed it to send it back to us. We don't know how to deal with it basically, because we don't see any, we only see fees as something that could be used. We don't see any other real options. So where do you want to go with this? I mean, throwing it back to them because they threw it to us because they really didn't want to accept it. I mean, that's kind of what they said.
I thought they
That's what I
accepted
heard.
it. I thought they accepted it with the caveat only when they know how it would be paid for. I mean, I think they accepted our recommendation.
I think Paul had a great idea of our next meeting. I think if finance department could come in with examples of, other than stormwater fee, what's available to fund this. We could hear that, and then I don't know what we'll hear. I kind of have a suspicion, but I'm open to that. So that will be the impetus as to our next steps would be, we don't have any more steps to take, because then we go back, like you said, Dee, once we have that information, and then as Paul eloquently said, we're like, look, we've looked at this, other than the stormwater fee. If you're interested in going forward with that, we will be more than happy to continue on. If not, thank you very much, everybody. We learned a heck of a lot about stormwater in the city of Dublin and the great things that you guys are doing, and we'll leave you to something else, and we'll go on to something else as well. I mean, I don't want to be flip about it, but I also too, it's, we you know, and unfortunately for Jim and Gary, you guys are coming in, this is the first meeting you've had. It's like, oh, hey, well, one and done. Well, that could, with this topic, don't get me wrong, you got a lot more topics and many more meetings to discuss. So, but I think we're just kind of going in circles until we get a little bit more information from finance, and then we can kind of move forward from there.
Just from an outside viewpoint, being the newbie on board, when I was listening to the city council presentation or questions that they had about the recommendation, I think option number 4 was easy to accept if there's no money involved. As soon as you throw the money aspect into it, it gets tossed right out the door. So I think the whole situation, I thought Greg Peterson with his comments about possible legal issues then, also dealing with the HOAs and things like that. But as soon as you add in the money aspect, I think option number 4 went out the door. They really didn't accept it. And I think we're probably back to option 1, maybe leaving things as they are.
Well, I took them accepting it based pending how it would be paid for. That's how I took their.
So I will clarify. So their council did not make any motion to accept the recommendation. To your point, Steve, the caveat being we don't want it to be an unfunded mandate. If they had made a motion to accept to accept the recommendation, that would have, in essence, probably from some legal standpoint, had us taking over, or a step toward taking over those basins without any real discussion about a funding mechanism. So to follow that up, I do think that your challenge from City Council was to at least explore, and I mean, I know that somebody had brought up the mayor's comments about creative funding mechanisms. And I know we've had some discussion about, are there creative funding mechanisms out there? What really exists? I think for the due diligence of this commission and for you all, and the challenge that was given to you from City Council, would to at least take another meeting to hear out any potential, any potential other funding mechanisms. That way, you can have that discussion. We'll come back to you. I'll work, I'll take the time and take some time to follow up with our finance department. I'll say, this is a need we have for you guys. Let's take some time, explore, do a little bit of research, and come back to this commission with what we were able to find. That would give you the opportunity to have some discussion about what is out there, be able to say, okay, city council, we took your challenge to explore other funding mechanisms. We either, identified some really great options for you, or we really feel that the only real sort of proper option moving forward would be a stormwater utility fee. And, after exploring all the options, that's what we're bringing forward to you. I think that puts you in a position where you've done and taken on what city council has asked you to do as a commission, while still sort of being comfortable with what you're bringing forward to them.
Sure.
Okay.
That's kind of where I was heading, Nick, was to do that and to have finance talk to us. And then we find out, are there different ways of doing it? And if there are, great. If not, okay, there's this. But then that gives us the opportunity to revise our recommendation that, okay, pending there really isn't any other funding mechanism other than stormwater fee, hypothetically. Recommendation is, but if we don't want to do the fee, then the recommendation is status quo, leave it alone. I mean, I'd be willing to take a look at revising what we recommend.
Okay, good. I think we're all saying the same thing then. So Nick, just one more question for you. You guys have said you've talked about this offline or, within yourselves. Was there anything else you want to share with us before we get to our next agenda item?
I think not specific to this topic. I do think that Jim might have had a comment or a question before we do move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments. One, I mean, it was amazing education, reviewing all the documents, and my level of respect for engineering has gone up 1,000 times. It's amazing what you all do. I also feel empathy for all the council members, because I've heard the frustration in the other council meetings that Tom or Steve had around this thing. So it seems like for months you guys have been working on it, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I agree with Gary's assessment as well. I mean, I can't imagine a letter that would go to a Dublin resident that would give any kind of rationale for why they would be charged, say, an average of $50 a month, or excuse me, $50 a year for a couple of HOA groups that are kind of concerned about their pricing. I would think the whiplash would be traumatic on that. So I just wanted to toss that out, that I'm on the same page. I believe you all are. But in the idea of a solution, or a suggested solution, I did want to throw one out. And I know you're going to have the finance people look at it, but if you contain it, if there are 46 HOAs that, and maybe 2 or 3 of them have some issues, and others might have issues later on bubbling up, would there be one possible suggestion that you talk to those 46 HOA groups and say, hey, guess what? Some of you HOAs are having a hard time paying for this extra cost. You may be the next person that's coming to Dublin with that issue. If you all agree to increase your HOA fees just a tad, perhaps what you could do is give everybody sort of an insurance policy to potentially avoid what might be huge capital costs and repairs and maintenance down the road. So I just throw that out as an option. That way it keeps all the Dublin residents out of it, but it does give the city council one solution to consider.
Well, it was brought up at city council relative to your point, Jim, that, maybe the city should be selling stormwater maintenance as a service to these HOAs. I mean, one of the council.
But I understood that the actual cost to Dublin is actually the average wage of these contractors. So it actually would be more expensive than if they could do that on their own. That was what I read. I may be wrong on that, but that's what I thought I gathered.
You're correct about that. And that I didn't want to bring that up at the council meeting, but I mean, we can talk about it here. But our annual stormwater maintenance contract that we have, and it's actually with Danbert, who is a local contractor, we have to pay prevailing wage, for that contract because it's over the prevailing wage limits. So I can assure you that the HOAs are not paying prevailing wage rates, for the work that they're having done. So to your point, Jim, we are going to be the more expensive alternative to them. So I don't see that as a viable option of us them contracting with the city to do their maintenance work. That's probably not going to be in their favor.
Okay. So I think we have some next steps about finance, presenting some options. What about Vivek's point about outside of, Ohio? What are other communities doing? Is there any way of getting that type of information, or is that beyond?
Oh yeah, we actually are all members of the American Public Works Association, and they keep benchmarking data. We could reach out to them. I can tell you from, I'm on the state of Ohio board. As I said previously, it really is limited to stormwater utility fees and general fund revenue, and that varies by state. Ohio tends to be more income tax driven, whereas you go out to Colorado and their communities are more sales tax driven. It really depends on what your tax source is, but that goes into a general fund, and that's how they're paying for stormwater maintenance. There really aren't, again, everybody likes to use the word creative. Well, yeah, there are creative's been done. And a lot of it is just getting the mechanisms in place and the legislation to enable the funding mechanism. And that's a huge struggle. I mean, stormwater utility fees, which really started back in the 90s, was the result of a lot of work at the legislature to allow them to be implemented and put in place at the local level. There was a lot of pushback initially not to have that done. And the cities finally won out and got the enabling legislation.
Okay.
And Steve, just the one other thing that has sort of floated through my mind a little bit is we talk more about this too, and we will absolutely do what we can to pull in any sort of other options that are out there that the communities are doing or looking at. But I think one of the helpful things for me to sort of think through too has been, this is pretty unique in the sense that we're talking about, we already have our mechanisms in place, right, for funding stormwater basins, but we uniquely have these 46 basins that are on public property, that are privately maintained, that we have sort of discovered over the years we have ongoing issues, and HOAs are having challenges sort of maintaining them. So now we're sort of retroactively, almost in a sense, trying to take them over. And how many other communities out there have gone through that same process where they've discovered, okay, there are, we have these additional unique basins that we would prefer to take over the maintenance of. How do we go through that? And so, I think just sort of thinking about the uniqueness of that situation and where we find ourselves, I think to myself, how many other communities have sort of had to go through that, and maybe identifying that will help us get a sense for, what they maybe did, or even the process that they went through to figure out how to maybe fund and pay for those things.
So you volunteering to find that out for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to help.
That's what I heard.
We have intern support in our office as well. So he loves to do projects. He'll do some research for us. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna try our best to bring forward to you some other options that might exist out there, whether they're applicable to the city or not. I think at least if we can say this is what other communities do when they face these challenges,
that'd be awesome.
So that you all at least have the opportunity to feel as though you've really exhausted all your different options before we come back to city council and say, stormwater utility is really the only path forward in funding this long term. And obviously, that'll be a larger discussion if that's the recommendation, but before doing that, we'll do our best as staff to bring forward to you any other options that we believe are out there at the next meeting that we have.
And I think the other action that we could do at staff level is Nick and I can have a conversation with Matt Stifler, our finance director, about his thoughts about either someone on his staff or who he might have at his disposal to come in and talk about funding mechanisms and kind of give you a funding 101 presentation. I think that would be helpful.
Right. Okay. So
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
can I toss out one more thing? Because I don't know if it'll ever be revisited with the team we have here, but in keeping with the stormwater improvements and such, I know you had talked about this during your last meeting about the Rake Them Right educational brochures, because you asked if there was some education that was out. And I know that brochure is out and there's information on the website about Rake Them Right. I just throw this out because if we're looking to help the stormwater situation, I don't think it has many teeth in that when you make that announcement, because I look at the number of people in my neighborhood who comply with that. I'd say maybe 25% of the people put their leaves on the curb, the rest are on the grass. The rest of them put them in the curb because they want to not kill their grass. So I just want to throw this out because if, you know, trying to find incremental improvement in conserving stormwater systems, is there a way that we could improve compliance? Because if I knew that it was going to cost the city $350,000 and $50 out of my taxes each year for stormwater repairs, because I have my leaves in the in the gutter instead of on the yard, then I would probably pay more attention to it. Right now, I really don't know the ramifications of it. So I just toss that out as a potential minor suggestion.
Okay. I think we could just maybe embellish upon them at our next meeting, maybe as part of a recommendation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to move to other items of interest. Anyone have anything? I guess I have one. I'm sorry if anybody has anything. I do have something for Nick. Let's say it sounds like we could bring closure to this quicker than later. Okay, what's in our? Do we have a formal queue of work for us? Or I know we've thrown out ideas, but is someone going to prioritize that for us? So we're not going to waste a meeting. I'll try and figure this out. Is this something we should do next meeting? How do we prioritize that workload?
Yeah, so Steve, that's a good question. At our, I think the last meeting that we all had, obviously Jim, I know Gary was in the audience for it. We discussed some potential topics. I had asked for you all to give me some areas of interest. I think we could, just for the benefit of the new members too, we could certainly do that again. And I can give you the refined list of some of the things. I felt that we pulled out some items that I think are both of interest to the commission and would be beneficial to staff in the community to take a look at. I think the majority of them were park related. One of the challenges we have right now is just, all of this happened literally right before the pandemic really hit. I've reached out to some of our members and some of the staff that we were hoping to maybe bring in over the course of the next couple of meetings for some different topics. A lot of what our staff is sort of focused and in the weeds on right now is just a lot of the reopening and restarting. And I've hesitated to put the pressure on a little bit just because specifically from our Parks and Recreation staff, they're sort of all in on training and bringing on board all of their seasonal staff and the folks that they can get back out there so that they can open up some of our facilities and so forth. So we have topics that are out there, but we don't have them sort of in the queue ready to go just because of some of the things that have happened here, not just for our community, but across the country and across the world that I think everybody's sort of facing. And so, I think this is still the one that is front and center for us. My hope is that, I think we'll likely have other topics that come up here over the next couple of months. Hopefully, as fingers crossed, everything maybe gets back to some level of normalcy for our community and for all of us, that there might be some topics that come up that, are appropriate and good sort of meaty topics for this commission to look at. But if not, we have, our Parks Department is going to be taking a look and sort of updating their master plan. A good core chunk of what this commission works on is parks related in one matter or another. So, I think at some point they're going to be coming to this commission to discuss some of the components of that update. Some of the other things that had come up is, it's semi-related to stormwater management, but is a much, broader topic, and is probably one that's sort of front and center now after experiencing, this pandemic, is the, our emergency response plan, and for the community and as an organization. And I know I shared with you all that, we have a lot of internal mechanisms, and we have and policies in place for emergency management, but it's something that is important to our current city manager, and we spend a lot of training time, I know Paul knows, training for emergency management, potential situations and events that might take place. So, that's certainly something that we could bring forward to this commission. And if it's, after this most recent pandemic, I think one of the things we've learned is, anything can happen. I don't think that a infectious disease pandemic was at the front and center of our, expectations, or I don't know that expectation's the word, but anticipated emergencies that would take place here in our community. But that's obviously one of the most recent disasters that has taken place here in our community. So are they looking at refreshing that to be more cohesive and incorporating some of the things that we've experienced as a community over the last few months? So I know that was very long-winded and a lot of information, but I've just obviously been thinking about this quite a bit. I know I had indicated that there might be opportunity for us. I know we usually take a recess here in July and in August, but because we hadn't met for a couple months, there might be an opportunity to meet here, whether it's in July, August, or both. However, as so much of our staff is engaged with sort of reopening and bringing services back online, I don't know how ready any of our topics might be, at least in the July timeframe. But I think this is an opportunity. We have a few minutes left here before our meeting's supposed to end, to maybe discuss a little bit of that stuff. I don't know if anybody has anything on their mind. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'd like to, I was going to bring that up when we talked about our next meeting, if we want to meet in July or August, because we have been off for 2 months. So I had the same train of thought, but, only if we have something to talk about, obviously.
How about if we were to finally come up with an answer to city council's bouncing the stormwater back to us? Can we get a finance person in to talk about it so that we can at least give city council something that says, here's our final statement? We can do that. That would be one topic, and then it could be finished.
Yes. So that would be the priority. That would be the priority topic. If we could do July, I would prefer August, just personally, to give us a little bit of, I would like to be able to get this commission, a lot of that information in advance. So, the turnaround time, I'd like to be able to take some time, obviously, to do our research, and then be able to get you all that information so that you have some time to digest it. It can just be tough, to have our 2-hour meeting and you sit here and you're watching the presentation and trying to take in as much as possible. So we'd love to be able to get you some of that information in advance. So I think if an August timeframe, I think is realistic, and I think it's totally appropriate to meet during August after sort of missing a couple of months there. But I do want to make sure that everybody else on the commission would be comfortable with that as well. I know, it's a nice time of the year. I think we've all been cooped up for quite a while. So I don't know if people have started to make plans and we're anticipating not sort of meeting during that time.
You want to just do a show of hands who could meet in August? It'd be August 11th. It looks like we all can. Okay, great. So let's plan August 11th, okay, Nick?
Okay.
And let's say for our next meeting, I just gotta throw this out. I know you took a poll of who wanted to meet in person and who wanted Zoom. Is there a way of doing a hybrid meeting for those that don't feel comfortable in meeting in person to Zoom in, and others who feel okay to, use social distancing like council does and meet in person?
Steve, just before we do that too, the direction that we've received from our IT staff,
Yeah.
just from a management standpoint, is that they prefer us to pick one or the other. Because trust me, I floated this out too. I was like, well, it'd be great if we could get some people in and maybe some. So let me do some follow up with them to see if that's an option, and then we can maybe see if that is maybe an available option. If it is an option, I could reach out and see if that's something we can manage and make happen.
Okay.
You
Anyone
said
else?
city, well, you said city council met for the first time in person, right? They managed
They
to have
did.
a meeting.
Jim,
Right.
did you have a question?
Well, I just real quick, I mean, one of the things when you asked about agenda items, I was really fired up to get involved with the seniors and leveraging the talents of the seniors. I actually teach harmonica classes at the rec center for seniors the last year or so. We have quite a vibrant group, and that's totally been destroyed. I mean, no, we don't meet, we don't do anything right now. We're just trying to preserve ourselves. So that's kind of been shot. But I did notice something in the 300 pages about the bicycles, the electric bikes and such. I thought that when I read early on, I had completed that survey about the Lime bikes. I thought that was kind of a dead issue, but is that going on anyway to bring bikes in? And are we involved in any kind of impact on that decision-making, or is that sort of out of our hands?
Oh, no. As you know, at least a few of the commission members currently know, I bring forward bicycle topics on the regular. So I'm happy to bring some of that forward. We do have some things progressing on that front, and that's absolutely a topic that that myself and J.M. Rayburn, who is a planner in our planning department, I think we both have some information that we'd love feedback on as it relates to wayfinding on the shared use path. And we are also taking a look at partnering with another bike share company. They are a dockless bike share company. They're all e-bikes. So that's definitely something that we would love to get feedback on as well. So, you know, if we might look to put it on the August agenda if it's ready for that. If not, we might look to put it in September or something, but we'll absolutely continue to bring forward topics as they relate to, you know, bicycling, as well as, you know, our Forever Dublin program as well. So, you know, that's something that this commission has helped abundantly with in sort of the creation of that program and a lot of that work. So we can definitely continue to bring those topics forward as well.
Thank you. I mean, I had a negative experience with the Lime pilot. So I just bring that up because maybe future options might, you know, be more amenable for Dublin folks and stuff.
Okay, anything else before we wrap up here? If not, I would like to welcome again Jim and Gary to the team, and re-welcome Dee, since she's been first person I've seen sworn in what, 3 months or something, or 6 months. So to adjourn the meeting, I don't remember my Robert's rules. Is it a motion or is it just done? Do I need a motion to adjourn? Nick or Tom, you're the expert.
Yeah, usually I'll move to adjourn.
Okay, a second.
Second.
I second.
Okay, so we'll see everyone August, I think it was 11. Thank you very much. Thank you to Dublin staff, really appreciate it. And
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You guys did a very nice job.
All right.
All right, Cindy, are you ending the meeting?
I am stopping the live stream as of now. You may
Thank
stay
you.
on the meeting if you wish to say goodbye to one another further.